Thank you so much, Rick. I'm sure it wasn't easy to be with such giants like Nikki Bullard and Chuck Porter and Andy Dimitriou in this such an amazing panel. But you're doing always amazing job. Thank you so much. Next, we continue with a panel discussion around sustainability and operational efficiency in tech. I like this topic. I like the tens of thousands of all of you being here, and Leisha Santorelli, world editor and senior journalist at BBC, who is going to moderate this panel. Leisha, you have the world with you.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us for today's panel on sustainability and operational efficiency in tech. We have a great set of guests for us today, starting with Matt Brittin, the president of EMEA Business and Operations at Google, Petra Jenner, senior vice president EMEA at Salesforce, Mariam Al-Foudery, group chief marketing officer at Agility, Anthony Baker, Vice President Technology Strategy for Asia Pacific at RGA. Thank you everyone for joining us. So let's just kick off into the discussion straight away with our topic, sustainability and operational efficiency. Starting with Matt, can you just, each of you in about 2 minutes, just give an overview of what this headline, what this topic means to you?
Yeah, thank you. And really excited to be here today. I'm at Google and I've been there for 15 years, man and boy, and we're on a big decarbonisation journey ourselves. So it's about decarbonising our operations. We became carbon neutral in 2007, and ever since then we've been trying to reduce our use of carbon. And we've now set ourselves a target to run our data centres and operations completely carbon zero by 2030. That sounds like a big goal, but we've already got a couple of data centers in Europe that are running on renewables 94% of the time. So thing one for us is making our operations carbon zero, carbon free. Thing two is how we partner with others, and we can talk about some of this as we go through the conversation, but we work with cities using technology to help understand where we've got emissions, where solar could be used and so on. We work with companies on their supply chains, people like Unilever and other big supply chain companies. And then the third thing from us, of course, is you know Google because you're a user of our consumer products. So we want to help you make more sustainable choices there. And we've recently made some changes. So if you search for a flight on Google, you'll find that we list the amount of emissions based on the age of the aircraft, the routing and so on, and the cabin that you're in to help you have another piece of information to make a better choice. Same with maps, we'll give you the least carbon intensive route options on maps as well. So for us, that's three things. It's our own operations and that journey. It's partnering with others in the world of cities and companies, and it's helping everyday people make smarter choices when they're able.
Thanks, Matt. We'll deep dive into that in a second, but let's first go to Petra next.
Yes, so I think, you know, we are in the midst of multiple crises, right? And we are very unprecedented times. And I think from our perspective, Salesforce is a net zero company. And by 2022, we also want to see 100% renewable energy for our global operations, right? I think that's a clear mandate. We are also a founding partner of 1 Trillion Org, right, to accelerate the movement, to plant, 1 trillion trees worldwide. So we are very much into sustainability. We have also support our customers to measure their, emissions and their carbon emissions overall. So from that perspective, we believe sustainability is a must, right? It's part of everybody's business strategy. And then on top of that, we have the digital acceleration, right? Which accelerated every company to, rethink their business models, right? For future growth. So all of this together, drives fundamental shift of the economy. And we are very privileged to be part of that. And we really want to, we see we have a mandate for many companies to become not only carbon neutral, but to support them also on their journeys into a new digital future.
Thank you. Mariam, what about you and agility? What does sustainability and operational efficiency mean?
So agility is in the supply chain industry, and the way that we think about sustainability, we use a very broad-based definition of sustainability. So we think about environmental issues, of course, but we also think about human rights issues, supply chain. We think about community investments that we make around the world, particularly because our background is we're a leader in emerging markets where social issues as well as labor issues are very important along with environmental issues. And so when we think about, from an agility perspective, when we think about our strategy, we think about our own operations very much like Petra and Matt. We think about how we can, look at renewables in our own operations. We think about how we can partner with customers to make greener choices and run greener supply chains. The second piece, though, is really looking at how we invest in sustainable innovation. So agility is increasing its investment portfolio in ESG-related technologies across the supply chain. So looking at, areas like road freight or other areas that are notoriously difficult and carbon intensive. And the third part is, again, very similar to what you heard Matt say, really around industry partnerships. So, this is a problem too complex for any one company to solve alone, and it really requires a lot of coalition-based thinking to tackle it. So that's how we think about sustainability.
ESG, of course, being environmental and social and corporate governance for those unfamiliar. Anthony, last but not least.
Hey, Leisha, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and taking part in this panel. Maybe slightly from a different angle, I've been working with RGA for about 10 years across 3 different continents. We work with Fortune 500 brands across the world. And we generally focus very much on helping brands creating experiences, values, and services with purpose, with something that adds value to people and adds value to the business themselves. Of course, that means, how do we leverage technology in ways that create value and are sustainable in terms of digital business models, in terms of value for the customers. But at the same time, the other big part of it is how do we leverage technology to become more efficient, and become more efficient not in a kind of like factory sense, but more in how do we help people to do their jobs better, to create more space, to create more opportunities for innovation and creativity. And that has to do a lot with the collaboration between designers, developers, CMOs, CEOs, and helping different brands to create services and experiences in a more efficient way, helping people to have a better life into it, looking at health, well-being, wellness, etc.
Well, it's really interesting to hear similar strands running through all 4 of your company when it comes to sustainability and the consciousness around the environment. With COP26 recently concluding in Glasgow in November, there were a lot of warnings coming out of that summit about how dire the climate crisis is and how important technology is to address the problems that we face as a global society. So from all your different sectors, do you think that we and corporates are moving fast enough, and is technology the answer? Let's kick off again with Matt.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to attend some of COP, and I have to say, although we didn't get everything that everybody would have hoped for, I was somewhat impressed by the commitments, measurable and audited, that countries are starting to make. And also really impressed by some of the companies around the table, including Salesforce and others represented here, who are serious and have got material and proven plans. So I feel like, as many have said, there is the technology we need is already there. Mark Carney, on behalf of the UN, has assembled a $136 trillion fund to fund the carbon transition. I think one of the key challenges is that all of us step up and play our part. It's clearly governments and companies and communities that, I think Mariam said, we need to work together across all 3. No one entity on its own is going to be able to do this. I think the second thing I'd say, and others have mentioned this as well, is the inequity of the climate crisis is enormous. Half the planet is responsible for about 10% of the emissions and will see most of the negative impact of climate change. So it's really imperative that we focus on those poorer countries and helping them with the technology transition at scale to do this. And you think about, I'm responsible for our operations in Africa. You think about Africa and have people have leapfrogged through multiple technologies to go straight to the mobile internet. That arms them with information and education and commercial opportunity. How can we do the same with sustainability, renewable energy? And that's one of the key areas for, I think, all of us to focus on. So it has to be governments, companies, and communities. I'm somewhat more positive, having had low expectations, because I've seen how material some of the work is. And I think also we can believe in some of this technology, the progress we've made. I would never have forecast we get to the kind of point we are already on running on carbon-free energy. And I think that gives me some hope for the future.
Petra, Salesforce is another massive technology company, and similar to Google and other big technology firms, the sector consumes an enormous amount of energy, including fossil fuels. And so how do these big firms really become carbon neutral or 100% renewable? Are offsets such as planting trees really adequate in terms of offsetting all of the energy consumption that is being used as technology pervades every aspect of our day-to-day life now across the world?
Look, I think, first of all, it's not only about the tech companies, it's about the entire economy, right, which needs to support, sustainable ways of doing business, right? And I think Salesforce has been on this journey over a decade, right? It's not, let's say, a lip service now as it gets more urgent and more visible. It is something Salesforce has built from day one into the DNA. And I think the only way to do this is to really work closely with partners, with the people who, suppliers, to be very diligent on who we work with, right? We have really high standards on how we collaborate with other vendors. And this is really to sustain a carbon neutral environment. And, we work with companies like Google, right, as Matt said, but also others, to ensure that we leverage what's there to the maximum, right? I think that's our obligation. And I think, coming to the other question in terms of what has happened at COP, I would say the thing which stood out for me is that's the first time ever that so many companies have shown commitment to it. I think that's also something which is new. It's like the private-public partnership, which is now getting into life and getting into action. And I think with that, as Matt said before, I think that's the only way we can cope and we can overcome the crisis. And we believe that trillion trees and ecosystem restoration is a good way of, fighting the climate, the climate change. I think that's one way to do it, right? We have to start somewhere. I believe that if everyone contributes a little bit, it will be a better world. And therefore, I was really delighted to see so many companies joining this climate conference recently, which is, I think, something which hasn't happened before.
I don't want to take away from the positives, but critics have said that the commitments made at COP26 are nowhere near enough to address the climate crisis. So let's go to Anthony. Do you think technology can help mitigate the climate crisis more broadly, more quickly?
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. I kind of agree with what Matt said. I think that the technology is already there and has been there for a while. It's about how do we actually help the technology being embraced. And for example, at RGA, we help a lot of brands try to navigate new and emerging technologies before they go into mass adoption. And the one thing that we have noticed is we have ventures studios in the Americas and Europe where we work with nascent technologies, a lot of the times around sustainability or new technologies or sustainable technologies, or, with services and experience to reduce plastic waste or things like that. And what we have noticed is that the roadblocks that these companies face to be able to scale their business and gain mass adoption has been mind-boggling. So we work with a lot of them to trying to make the connections with the bigger clients that we work with and try to bring those partnerships together to create more opportunities to drive more sustainable ways of doing business. As Petra was saying, there's a digital acceleration factor with it, which of course COVID and the whole war pandemic has pushed to the maximum. But on the flip side of that, we work with a lot of consumer insights. And what we are seeing is that, and observing is that a lot of consumers are no longer just expecting, seamless experiences and services. They are expecting companies to be purposeful and to stand for something and to have a say into sustainability, into wellness, into health. So it's becoming more and more apparent that the technology is there. It's about how do we help companies embrace it in a business sustainable way so people can rely more on companies that are acting behind a purpose and actually committing more to things that are massively important to us, like sustainability. I don't think that is fast enough, but I think that the consumer behavior and expectations are potentially pushing that opportunity.
Well, Mariam, the logistics industry really feels the impact of climate change, but it's also a major contributor to carbon emissions. So can technology help mitigate the impacts from what the logistics industry contributes towards the climate crisis?
Like everybody else, I will say that technology has a huge role to play. I mean, BCG put a number on it. They said that, to reach the emissions targets that we need to reach to at least stabilize global warming, existing technology would allow widespread adoption of existing technology would allow you to address about 65% of existing emissions. I think the question of adoption is the big one. And the question of adoption comes down to a few different factors that I think need to be thought about. Matt correctly called out the question of emerging markets. How do you make sure that emerging markets are not left behind in this story? And I'll just give you one example from the logistics industry. Let's look at electric trucking for road freight, for example. So huge advances are being made. You're seeing prototypes of electric trucks being rolled out in different countries and advanced economies. But even if an electric truck exists, for example, if your electricity grid is not green, an electric truck is not going to substantially reduce emissions in a market where your electricity grid is not powered by renewable energy. So that has huge implications for emerging markets. It's not a technology problem that you're solving for there. I think the second thing to think about is to think about the supply chain as an ecosystem. So, there's a lot of focus on big brands, and rightfully so. Big brands are hugely important drivers of economic growth and drivers of jobs and so on. But you also have the fact that most of the world is not made up of big brands. It's made of small and medium-sized enterprises. That's where most of the jobs in the world are, particularly in emerging markets. And so how do you think about technology adoption and acceleration in the SME segment? And and it's a broader issue than just, it's about financing, it's about digital skill. There are a lot of things that you really need to think about when you think about technology adoption in the SME segment. So I think, for sure, technology has a role to play, no question about it. But one has to dig a little deeper when we think about what that actually looks like on the ground.
Let's take a closer look at cities, because cities obviously are the hubs for human activity. And so let's go to Matt, because Google does quite a bit of work in helping cities, businesses, and as you mentioned earlier, some of the Google users to make conscious decisions when it comes to reducing emissions. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the initiatives that Google is supporting on the ground?
Yeah, thanks, Leisha. I think it's been fascinating to me to see how we've been able to work with cities in partnership. Initially 500 cities, and we set ourselves a goal of seeing if we could help them reduce 1 million tons of carbon a year between them, using an array of different techniques. So you can find this online, but you can use satellite and high quality imaging technology with machine learning to identify where are the roof spaces for solar. We can use our Street View cars, which help us to capture images and map information for Google Maps to capture air quality information and help cities get a really accurate view of emissions. You find really astonishing things like you can have an 8x difference between the air quality across a few streets. So that kind of insight, working to provide environmental insights explorer, we call it, working to provide cities with data that can help them make the business case, for example, for solar, can help them with air quality improvement. And the other thing I'd say, and a couple of others have mentioned this, I think Petra as well, sharing the research and the toolkit across the world, because we are all in this together. This is one of those areas where it's a sort of research field, and cities share across the world what they've been doing. So where I live in London, the Mayor Sadiq Khan has just become the chair of the C40 cities, which is to try and help cities on decarbonisation across the world. And London's just expanded its ultra low emissions zones, partly because of the work that we've done with the city on air quality. They were able to see how much the ultra low emission zone had positively improved lives and expanded it to cover another 4 million people. So I think that's a good example, I think, of practical uses of technology. In this case, it's providing data that allows people to make the investment cases and make the change.
And Petra, do you think that this push towards more greening and sustainability of corporates helps to stimulate growth, helps improve the bottom line?
It definitely will have the impact of, improving the growth and also bottom line. If you do this as a holistic, or top to bottom, or the entire, value chain is affected, then it will have clearly positive effects on the bottom line. Yeah, absolutely. I'm convinced about it. You may have to invest in the first phase, right? But then the return on investment will be there, and it will be huge. And it's also, I also believe that there is no alternative, right? We have to, everyone has to contribute. And the more we can define it, and the faster we do it, the better it is for our planet.
And Mariam mentioned that there's a gap between developed and emerging market countries. So Anthony, you've worked in international cross-cultural environments. What would your strategy or your approach be in navigating through some of the cultural differences and the different levels of development, or communicating it in a marketing type of way to get that message across about how urgent, how important it is?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, in some way or form, I think that organically things are starting to happen, maybe not in the way that we expect. But for example, in a lot of emerging markets, the labor opportunities are becoming from digital platforms that allow people to work with international companies and get a lot higher salaries without having to actually go through, transnationals and work locally and things like that. So certain boundaries and certain borders are being changed in that way. And I think that with that, it comes the opportunity for a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of starting companies, a lot of young talent that want to do different things or want to work in a different way, or work with companies that are pushing for a different kind of like purpose, to kind of like break those physical and geographical boundaries. In our case, what we are seeing is that a lot of the opportunities for innovation come from collaboration across borders, across cultures. Most of our work and the best work that we have done with a lot of our clients comes from having people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different educational backgrounds, different ideas. And when you start working with people, say, for example, developers from Ecuador or Buenos Aires, with creators from Brazil and business people from Japan, that's where things are starting to really turn into a lot of different spaces for opportunity. In that sense, we have seen a lot of great ideas that, as Matt said, a lot of people are leaving these problems in their own countries, and they have a lot of ideas on what could actually work. What they need is experiencing, scaling up, being able to grow different kind of talent, different kind of scale potential. So for example, we have a tech hub in Indonesia that allows us to connect with more and more businesses across Southeast Asia, and we are connecting that with a lot of our offices in Buenos Aires, in Brazil, in the States, and in Europe. And I think that it's that cross-pollination of different talent across borders, which, thanks to all the digital acceleration that we're seeing, is kind of like not suffering from the same kind of like disparity in kind of like opportunities and talent and space. It's definitely accelerating the opportunities for having companies, and as Mariam really pointed out, a lot of smaller companies are getting a lot of opportunities for this kind of innovation that is no longer in the hands of just a few massive companies that have the opportunity for technology. Now, at the same time, we work with bigger companies that are giving a lot of these opportunities to smaller companies and smaller entrepreneurs and smaller innovative people and companies that want to do something different.
So Anthony touched on the benefits of this interconnectedness, how technology makes the world smaller in so many ways, but it's also thrown up some weaknesses, most notably in our global supply chain. So Mariam, when it comes to operational efficiency, given all the problems we've seen within logistics and supply chains over the last, I want to say 2 years in particular, what more can be done? How much more technology can be harnessed to improve the issues that we've seen, or is it time to just scrap just-in-time supply chains?
Great question. So, the supply chain industry has been rocked over the last 2 years. I mean, I think we've seen a supply chain crisis on an unprecedented scale, certainly in our lifetimes. And it was very interesting. I think Bank of America recently put out a report saying they've seen the word supply chain in earnings calls increase by something like 400% in 2021 over last year, which you would think is, would have been the big year, but actually it keeps getting, it's been a sustained challenge. I think, one of the really interesting things about the sustainability space more broadly, when it comes to supply chain, is that it's not always just about new technology or greener technology. It's also about solving the information challenges, right? So Matt gave you a great example of, using satellite technology to find roof availability for solar. And I think in the logistics industry, it's very similar. It's about harnessing information that allows you to manage disruption, understand where the disruptions are coming from, model around them and reroute. And I think that's one of the really good things that's happened from the last 2 years is you've seen technology adoption across the board, helping to solve some of these information challenges. And that in the long term, I think will lead to more resilient supply chains. So I don't think it's time to completely scrap just-in-time supply chains and replace them with just-in-case supply chains. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, as it usually is. But technology is definitely going to be part of the problem, part of the solution. And I just want to give you one example of this in just of the information challenge issue in an emerging markets context. So there's a business that we've invested in that is really interesting. It's a digital freight matching platform in Brazil, and essentially it's not a green technology. It's basically Uber for trucking. It's there's truckers and there are shippers, and it puts them together. But it's solving a huge sustainability challenge, which is the issue of trucks traveling empty on the backhaul. So it's 30% of all trucking emissions actually comes from these empty trucks on the road. So sometimes solving the information problem is also solving the sustainability problem. And I think that's one of the really powerful and exciting things that you're seeing come from this digital revolution that we're all experiencing.
It's interesting in terms of finding new innovative ways to solve problems that crop up. Google is the place that everyone goes to when you do have a question. Matt, could you talk a little bit more about what some of the work you're doing around decarbonization with your partners is? What's the strategy there in terms of working with partners?
Yeah, thank you. I think, as several have mentioned, companies generally do want to do good in this field. I think, propelled by employees, propelled by shareholders, and you mentioned at the beginning, Leisha, the ESG agenda, which is, I think, going to be a powerful force for change here. How do we work with partners and also with users? I think I mentioned with cities, but let's take another example, supply chain. And Mariam mentioned how it's not just big companies, but small companies. We work with Unilever, one of the world's biggest consumer companies, on supply chain in the field of palm oil, which is an ingredient in many of their products, but has been connected with the negative impact of deforestation. Now, they pick up palm oil from very, very small producers, and it's really hard to track that supply chain. So by working with mobile phone technology, so we can see where their drivers have gone to pick up, and then using satellite imagery, so we can see what happened pre and post the pickup to the trees, you're actually able to start to help them to provide an audit trail in their supply chain. They say, hang on a minute, we picked up the palm oil and then a couple of months later, the trees are all gone. This is not good. And they can then grow with the better suppliers. So that's a simple example, but one that we've got some real benefit from Unilever's participation in, where they're able to drive better choices. Now, the people buying their products want better choices, their employees want better choices, and the technology is helping to enable those better practices in the field. So I think that's a good example. And we're seeing this more and more in supply chain, actually. Interesting to talk more with Mariam. We work with Stella McCartney and on fashion with the Worldwide Fund, looking at supply chain and waste. And fashion is an industry where actually there's a huge amount of opportunity for decarbonisation and improvement, waste, and managing every step of the process in the supply chain. So beginning to have a tool which we've just published that the industry can use to better understand where the impact is. And then the final thing I mentioned earlier, helping users who are looking at flights get carbon information alongside, is it convenient flight? What's the price like? But actually also, is it more or less than the average carbon emissions of flights like this? That can help. We want to do a lot more of that on the product side. So we're just starting to do that on the most energy intensive products. But imagine a world when you're looking for products, you can look at convenience, availability. Is it in a store near me, or can I get it tomorrow? You can look at price, you can look at features, and you can look at the carbon impact. And again, it's just giving you another factor in your decision making. Sometimes, it may be best for you to take the expedient choice, but it's a nudge towards taking better choices as well. So I think all of those things, providing better data for businesses and cities, but also for everyday users. And I think, the change will come from all of them.
I think it's really amazing how important and how the supply chain is in terms of how much it's increased in terms of conversation. It used to be one of those topics that the average, mass audience would want to avoid with the barge pole, but it affects our everyday life. And some really great examples there, Matt. Petra, Salesforce has a number of initiatives as well, including around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But which areas is your firm looking to increase investments?
I think clearly on the sustainability, right? It's an area we will increase investment, and then on top of that, everything in terms of equality, right? It's one of our core values, and that's an area where our founder and CEO Mark Benioff is very very outspoken about business as the greatest platform for change. And so there is an ongoing investment into, reducing inequality. And it starts, of course, with the employees of the company, but it also includes many other stakeholders. So things like improving the diversity, but also, having a focus on the underrepresented minorities. That's something where we are very strong at,
That's really interesting. I want to pick you up on that in terms of diversity within the workforce and how that leads to efficiency gains or operational gains. Where do we currently stand in terms of women in tech? And what more can tech companies do to attract them into the industry? Not just women, but minorities in general.
Yeah, I think, first of all, digital skills and digital talents are a scarce resource, right? There are not many digital talents around, and people with the right skill sets, right? So that's, first of all, we need to focus on education and training, and reskilling, upskilling the existing workforce. That's clearly something we have as a key initiative. The other thing is, where do we stand from a gender diversity and underrepresented minority? I think we will never be finished, right? There is a long way ahead of us. I think what is important is that we build lighthouses, I would say. The way Salesforce has addressed this theme is we have created global communities, for example, right, internally, make sure that the underrepresented minorities have a word to say in decisions and company decisions. We have specific trainings, right, in the organization. I think the other thing which is very important companies need to do, we need to also have very flexible and agile work styles. It's very important if you attract different people in different geographies, that you have what we call a digital headquarter, right? That you have the ability to have a strong communication, either synchronous or asynchronous. That you also are attracting people who with a purpose, right? And that means that as a company, you also have to have a clear purpose and a very strong drive for changing the world, which is, I think, one of the key requisites to attract talents these days. People are very much focused, especially the younger generations, and that's whether it's female or male or whether it's underrepresented minorities. They want to work for companies who have a meaning, who gives a meaning to what they're doing, right? So that's for me very essential, and that's something I can only I get this question from many of our customers, and I always repeat myself and saying, start working on this first, right? And then, build a very agile and flexible working environment, right? So that you can really work from anywhere. Because if people are not able to do this, you will not have the ability to keep them in the organization for a longer period of time, especially in these times where pandemic has shifted many roles and the way we've done business significantly, and this will last, I think, for the next coming years. This means that companies need to be prepared for that, and that means an agile and work from anywhere kind of normal workplace is a must in order to attract top talents, whether they're female or whether they're underrepresented minorities.
Really interesting points there, Petra, about the workplace and shifts that we're seeing, including the Great Resignation, which is making hiring in some markets incredibly tough because people are being poached left, right, and center. But Anthony, I saw you nodding your head there at quite a few of Petra's comments about, digital headquarters and new ways of working. I think that you have some insights in there as well in terms of how people now want to collaborate, especially in the creative space.
Yeah, definitely. So many great points from, everybody, Matt and Mariam and Petra. I would pick up Mariam on one very specific point, which was about information sharing. And we were talking about technologies are already there, and we just need to use them in different ways and be more creative, right? Across all these topics and all these points that we have made. The reality is that information is there and the technology to share the information is already there. So that being said, that allows us to understand better what is the workforce, what is the environment, what are the goals, what are the outcomes, what are the challenges, what are the issues, what are the potential solutions, right? So if we focus on trying to connecting more and sharing more all that information, enabling people to understand that information, do something with it, right? Being able to act on the information that is being shared, then we can make a lot of progress. And just to be more concrete and specific about Petra's point, I do think that, the shift in the work environment and the mobility aspect has been massive. For example, we globally, and as many companies as Google and many other companies, went fully remote for the past couple of years. We are now creating different plans to support people that want to work from the office and want to, go back to kind of like that work style, supporting hybrid behaviors of people that want to be able to have the option of going to an office, being surrounded with people, have spaces for many different reasons, right? Some of them is because of personal reasons, space reasons at home, but being able to also be surrounded by human beings and being able to have that connection, and people that want to go fully remote and actually adapt to that. Now, the thing is, it's not just about the work environment, it's how do we work as companies? How do we enable the flexibility of people working at different times across time zones, which is something that we experience quite a lot, working with offices that sometimes are 12 hours apart. So how do we do that? Well, technology plays a big role into that. There's a whole new wave of tools that allows people not only to video conferencing and do virtual summits as we're doing now, but allows us to, have virtual whiteboards that we can then use to brainstorm, and then we can share, and that we can output into creating designs and open design systems that allows us to work remotely, but also create these design systems for companies, so companies can also open up these design systems to be used by partners and to other people and even their own consumers, and have tools to better allow us to prototype ideas faster in a way that we can explore, lower the investment, lower kind of like the blockers to put things in practice. To give you a very concrete example of something that is impacting the way that we talk about sustainability, and that is quite new for us, it's NFTs, for example, based on blockchain technologies, which are energy hungry. Cryptocurrencies have been using them for a while, but now we are seeing a global embrace of blockchain technologies by banks, financial services, and now there's a whole wave of creative opportunities to create these digital goods, right? And we are starting to hear about the metaverse and like all this digital economy that is going to happen on the virtual world. But that has very tangible implications to the physical world, to all the emissions, to sustainability, and being able to have the information and tackle these issues and start shaping these technologies in different ways so we don't make the same mistakes is massively important. And I think that all of this part, how do we work, how do we share the information, how do we connect nascent technologies and allow people to be part of the solutions and drive things forward, is going to have massive implications into all the challenges that are up to come for us.
Thanks, Anthony. Well, we have about 5 minutes left. So what I want to do is go around our panel and ask them for their top tip or prediction for the next 12 to 18 months, because we've already heard them talk about the digital transformation and acceleration that we've seen over the pandemic. So that's likely to continue given COVID hasn't gone anywhere. So starting with Matt, let's get your top tip or prediction when it comes to sustainability and operational efficiency as the digital transformation acceleration continues.
Well, that's a tall order, Leisha. Let me try to kind of capture a thought there. Look, I think this conversation's shown us both the opportunity and the responsibility that we have in this moment. Like we've seen the tech acceleration through the pandemic. We've seen the impact of the pandemic disproportionately falling on the poorest. And we also see the climate crisis playing out in the same way. But I think also we see the opportunity of technology we've all talked about that is available now that can solve the climate crisis. Digital skills that if we put them in the hands of the right people can help with employment opportunities and growth. One of the things I'm proud of having done at Google is we've trained over 70 million people in digital skills to be ready for the jobs of the future. And what's happened is the jobs of the future are coming sooner than we expected because the shift that's happened as well. So I would say for me, the theme is big opportunity, but big responsibility. The next 18 months and how we address the pandemic recovery, digital skills, and climate are going to set us up for the next 10 years. I welcome the fact I'm sitting here in Paris talking to you today. The French are about to assume the presidency of the EU, and the EU has got a big fund focused on sustainability and digital skills. And it's that kind of top-down focus that we're all going to need in order to recover well. So that would be my feeling for the next 18 months.
Petra?
I think I can only echo what Matt said, right? I think it's about my tip would be to continue learning and educating on digital skills. I think they will be absolutely fundamental in the future. The other thing is always work on the purpose. Why are we doing what we are doing? I think that's very important as we move, move forward. And I think personally, I hope that companies will continue to invest in things like equality and making the world a better place by, really having better working environments, more flexible and agile working environments. I think that's something which is required to really help to rebuild and reshape the business world as it is today. I think that requires a lot of continued attention moving forward.
Mariam.
So my big prediction, Leisha, is that, and I think it's already happening, but I think over the next 18 months, you are going to see sustainability issues occupy as central a role in board discussions as the digital agenda 5 to 6 years ago. And I think with that, what you're going to see is a huge surge in green demand led by some of the world's bigger businesses that's going to trickle down to smaller and medium-sized enterprises as well. And with that green demand, what you're going to see, I hope, is you're going to see a flip between sustainability as a cost driver to sustainability as a profit driver. And the whole conversation is going to flip, because what's going to happen is we're not going to be sitting around talking about the cost of driving sustainable innovation and who's going to finance it. We're going to be talking about it as innovation that is going to drive more efficient global operations, more efficient global supply chains, and a more efficient world. And that's when the big change is going to happen. And I think we're well on our way.
Love that optimism. Anthony, do you share that optimism?
Yeah, I do. I think that there is a lot of opportunities. I think that definitely the one thing that I would expect is to see a lot more shifts in consumer behaviors, consumer expectations, and consumer demands. Echoing everybody's, I think that there's a lot of things that businesses will have to face in order to be able to keep their consumers happy. And I think that if I were to give a tip, it's for companies to, as Petra mentioned, look at their purpose. Why are they doing this? Or why are they doing what they do? What do they stand for? And also look at all the tools and technologies that they're currently using, find the gaps. As Mariam said, figure out how to best use things that are already in place, make the most of it, and look for alternatives and new opportunities to partner with different companies that could make of sustainability a driving force in the business.
And with that, we're out of time. Anthony Baker, Vice President of Technology Strategy at RGA, Mariam Al-Foudery, Group Chief Marketing Officer at Agility, Petra, Senior Vice President EMEA at Salesforce, and Matt Brittin, President of EMEA Business and Operations at Google. Thanks so much for your time, and I hope that you all enjoyed watching today's session.